Today I want to get into a slightly more nuanced diet topic, and that is the concept of flexible dieting. What is it? How to best utilize it? Some pros, some cons, what cohort's it for? And I want to make sure that we're clear on the fact that there's no tricks, there's no tips, no hacks. Flexible dieting, like any other diet, follows the same principles of caloric restriction, caloric surplus, thermodynamics, all that kind of stuff. So, with that out of the way, generally speaking, how flexible dieting works is that you try to ensure that the majority of your calories and macros come from nutritive sources, leaving the other 20% or the minority available for, the fun stuff. A slice of pizza here, some ice cream there, so on and so forth. And by the way, 80-20 aren't like the hard rules of flexible dieting. Those are just numbers that generally make sense for most people. It could be 70-30. It could even be 60-40, although that's maybe not the best percentage. I think 80-20 is a good starting point. So that's why I chose that as the illustration. This is a far more sensible approach than the OG if it fits your macros, where essentially you do the calculation on paper and whatever those numbers say, protein, carbs, fats, calories, you can fill those numbers with whatever food sources you deem fit, regardless of their nutritive quality. And therein lies the major failing of if it fits your macros, is it doesn't take into account micronutrients, zinc, magnesium, vitamin A, so on and so forth, right? Vitamins and minerals that oftentimes are rate-limiting materials for certain biological processes and general health, as well as the prevention of certain diseases. With the majority of your food coming from nutritive sources, like lean meats and vegetables, fruits, legumes, grains, these kinds of things, you don't run into the same micronutrient deficiency issue that you would on a strict if it fits your macros diet. And then with the other 20%, you can still have, your tasty lickies and chewies and not worry about negatively impacting your health. Now that's great on paper and generally good in practice, but this isn't really a con. This is more something to think about, okay? Flexible dieting tends to, in the literature and at least in the anecdote that I've seen and experienced myself, work better the larger a human you are and or the greater your energy requirements are. What do I mean by that and why? If I'm 133, we'll say 135. If I'm a 135 pound female, for instance, and my maintenance calories are right around 2,000, then 20% of that is 400 calories. So what that means is over the course of the day, 1,600 of those 2,000 calories need to come from nutritive sources. Too easy, right? Like, steak, chicken, vegetables, fruits. You got plenty you can put in there for 600 calories. But then for your lickies and chewies at the end of the day, 400 calories doesn't really go too far when you're talking about highly processed palatable foods. That's like a small fry or a cheeseburger or like a king-size Snickers bar. You know what I mean? And if you have the discipline or just your psychology is amenable to having a few bites and then putting it down, then that might work for you. But if you're the kind of person like I am that likes to eat a lot of tasty things, it's probably going to be difficult for you to make that kind of diet work sustainably. Whereas if you're a 250 pound person, man or woman, your maintenance calories are roughly, 3,750, 3,800. So 20% of that is 750 calories. That's a lot. you can have a decent amount of fun with that. You know, you could have like a slice of pizza, throw some Parmesan on there, you know, maybe dip it in some, I don't know. Yeah, I'm getting out of hand here, but like, you see what I'm saying? It's that 20% wiggle room, depending on what you put in there, goes a lot longer way if you're a bigger person or if your maintenance calories are just super high because you're extremely active. Now, for me, you know, I do myself follow a flexible dieting model, and I use my 20% roughly for things like barbecue sauce. No, really, that's about it. I mean, I guess you could consider the protein bar that I have for dessert in lieu of a sugar cookie part of the flexible dieting approach. However, that in of itself, while a processed food, is also extremely nutritive. So just kind of depends on your perspective as to whether or not that fits in the 20% category. Certainly, though, barbecue sauce, other than just a readily available source of glucose, is hardly nutritive. There's no micronutrients in there. And that's one of the main reasons why I meter my barbecue sauce instead of slathering my food in it like I used to do earlier in life, so as to keep the portion within that 20% flexible margin. And besides the psychology, folks, there's an important distinction to make between good nutrition and poor nutrition, with some long and short-term considerations. The long-term consideration being the effects of poor nutrition and preventable diseases, like, for instance, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, to name a few. And then the short-term, day-to-day contribution of poor nutrition to your overall life stress and your ability to handle it. We, us coaches, trainers, researchers, people who know things about this, when we throw out values like 80-20, it would seem on the surface that scales to the size of the individual, but my observations are that the 20% kind of eat whatever portion of flexible dieting does the least amount of harm the larger the individual, as a general rule of thumb, before taking into account any psychological factors. Last thing to consider, numbers aside, how it works on paper aside, if you decide to do a flexible dieting approach, which is kind of what many of us ultimately settle on after years of doing this, I know everyone hates the "it depends" kind of cop-out answer, but in lieu of saying that, what I recommend is that you take stock of how specific to you certain foods work or don't work. An objective set of criteria to do that would be, get blood work regularly, like annually at least, if not biannually or quarterly, as well as tracking how certain foods affect your performance in the gym, on the scale, so on and so forth. And then subjectively, just track how they make you feel, You feel sluggish, you got brain fog, you're a little cranky, you get a headache. These things, while not objective markers, they're important because you have to deal with them on a day-to-day basis, right? Just because a piece of paper says that a thing is okay to eat or even good for you, but it's giving you a headache or making you feel like junk, it might not be a thing for you. So ultimately, folks, that's what flexible dieting comes down to. The majority of your food is nutritive. You leave a little bit of wiggle room for the things you like to eat. With some attention to detail, take stock of how things are panning out. And even if a certain food fits your calories or macros, but it makes you feel some sort of way, or there's an appreciable decline in performance or some other marker that you care about, that's an indicator that for you, that just might not be a thing for you to eat, regardless of what it looks like on paper. I can drink barbecue sauce by the bottle, but I have a slice of pizza and I feel like crap the next day, so I just got to cut it out. At the end of the day, all these